All right. So thanks once again for coming out, everyone. All right. So as usual, before we begin anything, we'll just have a quick recap of what we would have looked at the last time we were here. So last time we were here, we looked at the schools of the false prophets, part 2, right? How worldly education got into our schools. And we saw that our Seventh-day Adventist schools were to be modeled after the schools of the prophets, catering for the development of the mental, physical, and spiritual aspects of our being. Now, we saw that there were a few schools that were doing this, right? We saw Atlantic Union College, Hillsburg College, Avondale College, and the Madison School. Now, especially in the case with the Madison School, right? It was a beacon of light. I mean, it was internationally known for the excellence of its students. So essentially, we became a spectacle to the world. We were fulfilling the purpose for which God raised us up in terms of education, right? Now, however, just like Israel desired to have the world's education or conform to the world, and as Israel ended up rejecting Christ when he came to the outer court of the sanctuary because of false education, right? Because of the false education of their leaders, we are now rejecting Christ in the most holy place because of the false education of our leaders. Right? Then we saw that worldliness came into our schools because of accreditation, right? And as a result of this, God's frown is now upon our schools. We saw that we shouldn't try to gain patronage or popularity by compromising truth. We saw that it will prevent schools from achieving the object for which they were set up. And it will also make unbelievers that may come to this school believe that truth is not that important if it can be so easily set aside for any reason. And it's not all that important, and that will, not help them. So that in 1931, we made a decision to accredit our liberal arts colleges, just like we did in 1910 for our medical schools. Right? And because of this, we essentially lost control of our schools, ever bowing to the increased demands of the accreditation agencies. Right? Now, in the case of Madison, the demands of the accrediting agencies stipulated that they had to add new libraries, new labs, and whatnot. And because of this, the debt in the school ballooned so much that they couldn't keep up on the school until it eventually closed down. Right? Um, Other demands, such as hiring non-Adventist teachers, right? Putting worldly books in our libraries, right? Introducing worldly education in our schools, right? And of course, needless to say, this had an impact on what the students were being taught. So instead of, learning about the three angels' messages, they started to learn non-Adventist theological concepts, right? And this led to the development of the false gospel in our church. And we looked at one, Desmond Ford, saw that he learned his concepts from whoever, the professor who was teaching him at a university in England, right? So he learned these theological concepts when he was doing his PhD. And this is what developed into what we now know as the new theology, right? Of course, we saw the controversy with Desmond Ford in Glacier View. And when the church fired him, I mean, the faculty of the schools, they have become so corrupt that they were demanding that we rehire him, right? And so we saw how, because of false education in our schools and churches, we went from preaching the true gospel to preaching the false gospel. And this is not a surprise because we saw that education and the gospel are inseparably linked. So if education is corrupted, then the gospel must follow as well. Right? So that's what essentially what we would have looked at as well. So the new theology or the false gospel came into our church as a result of false education. All right, so that's what we looked at last time we were here. Now, today our topic is going to be, who is the God that healeth thee? Of course, it's a kind of spin on Exodus 15:26, where God says, I am the God that healeth thee. All right. All right. So who is the God that healeth thee? So let's open up our Bibles to the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 7, and we will be reading from verses 9 to 12.
Know therefore that the Lord thy God, he is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him, and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations, and repayeth them that hate him to their face, to destroy them. He will not be slack to him that hateth him, he will repay him to his face. Thou shalt therefore keep the commandments and the statutes and the judgments which I command thee this day to do them. Wherefore it shall come to pass, if you hearken to these judgments, and keep and do them, that the Lord thy God shall keep unto thee the covenant and the mercy which he sware unto thy fathers.
Right, thank you for that. Now, here we see that God will keep covenant with those who obey his word. Which covenant is this? It says the covenant which he swore unto their fathers, or Jacob, Isaac, Abraham. The covenant made with Abraham was the promise of Christ the seed. Of course, we see that in Galatians 3:16, right? This covenant is the new covenant. Now, let's go now to Jeremiah 31, verses 31 to 33.
Days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was an husband unto them, saith the Lord. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts, and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people.
Now, what is the new covenant supposed to do? Write God's law in the heart. Now, God's law is his character/image. Therefore, the new covenant is supposed to restore to the image/character of God. Right? If we keep God's commandments, he will keep the new covenant with us. Now, our obedience purifies our souls, according to Psalms 119, 9 and 10, and 1 Peter 1:22. God then purifies the heart, which is what we just saw in Jeremiah 31, 31 to 33. He writes the law on it, right? So he purifies our heart by writing his law on it. So God promises to purify our hearts, to restore in the human soul the image of God. Now, let's go back to Deuteronomy. Let's now read Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 15.
will take away from thee all sickness, and will put none of the evil diseases of Egypt, which thou knowest, upon thee, but will lay them upon all them that hate thee.
All right, thank you. Now, do we see here that embedded within the new covenant slash the gospel is a promise of restoration of good health? Yes, it's right there. See, the natural laws follow the same pattern as the spiritual laws, which we just mentioned earlier. If we keep God's physical slash natural laws of health, our bodies will be purified. God then comes in and heals us of our diseases, restoring our physical bodies. Now, what did God say in Exodus 15:26? I am the God that healeth thee. So we see that from the beginning, health was always inseparably linked with the gospel. This is why it is called the right arm of the gospel, right? Now, we saw in the last study that true education is closely connected with the true gospel, and that Satan corrupted the true gospel in our church by corrupting our education system. Now, based on what we just saw, i.e., the relationship between health and the gospel, what else must have been corrupted by false education? Our understanding and practice of health and healing, a turning away from the God that healeth thee, and a reliance on the wisdom and inventions of man. Right? Now, what we will see in this study is that this did happen in the Seventh-day Adventist Church and is happening today. Apostasy in the area of health. All right? Now, as we did the last time we were here, we're going to go into some history as to how this happened. But first, let us hear what the prophet has to say concerning what our health work should be. Let's go to the screen. Share my screen. So let's see what it says. All right, somebody just read this for us, please.
All the light of the past, which shines onto the present and reaches forth into the future, as revealed in the Word of God, is for every soul who comes to our health institutions. The Lord designs that the sanitariums established among Seventh-day Adventists shall be symbols of what can be done for the world, types of the saving power of the truth of the gospel. They are to be agencies in the fulfillment of God's great purposes for the human race. To God's people and his institutions in this generation, as well as to ancient Israel, belong the words written by Moses through the spirit of inspiration. Thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth. Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my God commanded me. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great, who hath God so nigh unto them, as the Lord our God is in all things that we call upon him for? And what nation is there so great, that hath statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law which I set before you this day. Even these words fail of reaching the greatness and the glory of God's purpose to be accomplished through his people. Sanitariums are needed in which successful medical and surgical work can be done. Those institutions conducted in accordance with the will of God would remove prejudice and call our work into favorable notice. The highest aim of the workers in these institutions is to be the spiritual help to the patients. Successful evangelistic work can be done in connection with medical missionary work. It is as these lines of work are united that we may expect to gather the most precious fruit for the Lord.
All right, so do we see the prophet saying the same thing we saw in the Bible just now? Uh, the light we saw in Deuteronomy 7, which shined in the time of Moses, reaches forth to the future, which is today, right? Do we also see that the health work done in our sanitariums was to be a type of the saving power of the truths of the gospel? Yes, which means that the healing that people get at these institutions through exclusive dependence on divine power was to be an object lesson on how God heals and restores us from sin. In other words, their healing was to teach them about the gospel and open their hearts to receive it. Right? Now, so the physical healing of the body was to be a type or shadow of spiritual healing of the soul. Right? Now, let's say there was a challenging math problem to solve, right? Now, would it be easier or harder to solve this problem if you had a worked example of a similar problem? Now, would the worked example also give an appreciation of the application of the theory? Yes. See, spiritual healing of the soul is the math problem, and physical healing of the body is the worked example. Helps us to understand and appreciate the truths of the gospel, which give healing from sin. All right? All right, let's turn our Bibles now to the book of St. John. John chapter 5, verses 13 and 14.
And he that was healed wist not who it was, for Jesus had conveyed himself away, a multitude being in that place. Afterward, Jesus findeth him in the temple, and said unto him, Behold, thou art made whole. Sin no more, lest the worst thing come unto thee.
Now, from what we discussed just now, do we see why, more often than not, when Jesus healed someone, he would tell them to go and sin no more? Yes. See, disease is linked to sin. So the overcoming of disease is supposed to point to the overcoming of sin. All right? All right, so let's go to the screen once more. All right, let's read what this says here. What it says here.
The drugs being used in our institutions, it is contrary to the light which the Lord has been pleased to give. The drugging business has done more harm to our world and killed more than it has helped or cured. The light was first given to me why institutions should be established. That is, sanitariums were to reform the medical practices of physicians.
Right. Interesting. Thanks for that, sister. Right. All right. Now, as we progress in this study and see the difference between God's healing and man's healing, we'll see why the prophet is so against drugs. Suffice to say for now, that the use of drugs would destroy the type-antitype relationship between physical healing and spiritual healing, right? Now, we also see that the sanitariums were to reform the medical practices of the physicians of the day. Now, isn't it sad, therefore, that instead of reforming the medical practices of the physicians of the day, we have adopted the medical practices of the physicians of the day? Isn't that sad? Indeed. Let's go back to the screen. See what this says. Testimonies, volume 9, page 175, paragraph 1.
In the work of this school, maintain simplicity. No argument is so powerful as a success founded on simplicity. You may attain success in the education of students as medical missionaries without a medical school that can qualify physicians to compete with the physicians of the world. Let the students be given a practical education. The less dependent you are upon worldly methods of education, the better it will be for the students.
Right, thanks for that. Right. All right, now, given the close relationship between true education and the true gospel, which we looked at in the last study, and the type-antitype relationship between healing and the gospel, can we understand why the prophet is cautioning against worldly education in the training of our physicians? Yeah. If, as we saw before, a corruption of our education with worldly education resulted in the false gospel coming in among us, and healing is supposed to be a type of the gospel, then what would be the result of corrupting healing with worldly education? Well, the so-called healing that comes from it will no longer be a type of the true gospel, but a type of the false gospel, right? Now, let's explain. See, true healing says that through cooperation with God's laws of nature and the dependence on divine power, we can overcome disease, right? So that's true healing. Now, the true gospel says that through obedience slash cooperation with God's law and dependence on divine power, you can overcome sin, right? Isn't that what the true gospel says? Now, do we see clearly how true healing is a type of the true gospel? Is that clear? Now, see, the false gospel says that you can have the appearance of overcoming sin, i.e., being quote unquote loving, kind, a good person by not obeying God's word slash doing your own thing, all right? Live according to your own wisdom or live your own truth or rendering partial obedience to God's word. Well, needless to say, there'll be no divine power behind that, right? Now, someone might ask, then how is worldly healthcare or allopathic medicine a type of this? Well, let's examine it. See, worldly healthcare, right, gives an appearance of overcoming disease by a dependence on the wisdom and invention of men, example drugs, while not cooperating with God's laws of nature. Isn't that what allopathic medicine promotes? No need to change your bad habits. Just take this drug and everything will be okay. Do we see how worldly healthcare is a type of the false gospel? Right? So while we make ourselves dependent on worldly healthcare, we are at the same time learning the false gospel, right? And sad to say, this worldly healthcare is now the standard in our church-owned hospitals that we like to boast about. How did this happen? Someone might ask. Well, see, let's find out. See, in 1866, we opened the Battle Creek Sanitarium, later renamed the Western Health Reform Institute. Right, let's go into some history as to what is going on. Right? Uh, I'm gonna take this excerpt from the book Broken Blueprint, and we'll get to see what was going on in the Battle Creek Sanitarium. Let's go back to the screen. Right. So it says here, correct application of water, the right use of air, and a proper diet, along with other natural herbs, brought healing to many and spread the fame of the Institute. The allopaths taught that healing comes from the application of poisonous substances, but Battle Creek is showing the world that healing came from right living, the use of harmless healing substances, the practice of health principles, and the use of simple hydropathic means of treating disease were regarded as a means of cooperating with the divine power, which alone can truly heal. Disease was seen to be the result of transgression of natural law, and the duty and privilege of Christians to obey these laws and teach others to obey them was a part of the everlasting gospel. All right. All right. So we see what's happening there, right? Oh, this sounds like true healing, right? Because of what they were doing, i.e., following the treatment methods gave through Ellen White, the Battle Creek Sanitarium became known worldwide, right? God was fulfilling the promise that we saw earlier. And you remember when he said, Thou art a holy people unto the Lord, and the Lord has chosen thee to be a special people unto himself above all the people that are on the face of the earth. Behold, I taught you statutes and judgments. Then he says, For this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations which shall hear of these statutes and say, Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding. Right? So that is what God was doing for us because we were obeying what he said. Right? We were made a spectacle to the world. Right? Now, see, by 1891, a man that some of you would have heard of already, a man named John Harvey Kellogg, and he was a leading figure at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. Now, someone asked him how he managed to stay 5 years ahead of the medical profession. Right now, his answer is recorded in the book Legacy by Richard A. Schaefer. Let's look at it. Let's look at what Dr. Kellogg's answer was. Right here was what he said. He said, if something new was advocated, he instantly adopted it. If from his knowledge of Mrs. White's writings, it was sound. When other physicians finally accepted it, after slowly feeling their way, Kellogg had a 5-year head start. On the other hand, Kellogg rejected some of the new medical fads because they did not measure up to the light given to Mrs. White. When other doctors finally discovered their mistake, they wondered why Kellogg had not been caught as they had, right? So, right. Isn't that interesting? You see, at that time, we were the head, not the tail, as God promised we would be if we obeyed. Right? So again, I ask the question, how did we move from what we just saw to what is now the status quo in our church-owned hospitals? Let's go back to the screen. Right? Somebody just read this for us, please.
There is constant danger among our people that those who engage in labor in our schools and sanitariums will entertain the idea that they must get in line with the world, study the things which the world studies, and become familiar with the things that the world becomes familiar with. This is one of the greatest mistakes that could be made. We shall make grave mistakes unless we give special attention to the searching of the word.
Right. Thank you. So it seems here that there were some among us that wanted to, quote unquote, get in line with the world, right? With respect to health education. This is the danger that the prophet was warning against, right? Now, from what we studied before, how does one get in line with the world in the area of education? Yes, through accreditation, right? Now, let's go back to the screen. Let's read what this says here. Medical ministry.
Shall we represent before the world that our physicians must follow the pattern of the world before they can be qualified to act as successful physicians? This is the question that is now testing the faith of some of our brethren. Let not any of our brethren displease the Lord by advocating in their assemblies the idea that we need to obtain from unbelievers a higher education than that specified by the Lord. The representation of the great teacher is to be considered an all sufficient revelation. Those in our ranks who qualify as physicians are to receive only such education as is in harmony with these divine truths. Some have advised that students should, after taking some work at Loma Linda, complete their medical education in worldly colleges. But this is not in harmony with the Lord's plan. God is our wisdom, our sanctification, and our righteousness. Facilities should be provided at Loma Linda that the necessary instruction in medical lines may be given by instructors who fear the Lord and who are in harmony with his plans for the treatment of the sick. I have not a word to say in favor of the world's ideas of higher education in any school that we shall organize for the training of physicians. There is danger in their attaching themselves to worldly institutions and working under the ministrations of worldly physicians. Satan has given his orders to those who he has led to depart from the faith. I would now advise that none of our young people attach themselves to worldly medical institutions in the hope of gaining better success or stronger influence as physicians.
Right, thanks for that. Very emphatic words there. Right. Right. So there were some among us who were saying that, we have to get accredited by the world or go to a worldly school so that we can have qualified doctors, right? Now, as an aside, right, how many young people should go to worldly schools to become medical doctors, or how many of our young people should go to worldly schools to qualify to become medical doctors from what the prophet is saying here? None. Saying none. And some will say, oh, well, how can the prophet say that? I want to go to medical school so I can help people, right? Now, even from what we have covered so far, one can already get a sense of the deception that this is, right? But there is more to come. Now, Loma Linda was mentioned in the quotation Sister Warren read just now, right? Loma Linda was one of our main medical training schools that was also following the plan that God gave, right? Now, here's an excerpt from the book, Broken Blueprint by Vance Farrell, that gives some insight into how Loma Linda was steered away from God's blueprint. Let's go back to the screen. It says,
But pressure was continuing to mount for Melinda to try to align itself with the standards of the world in order to better succeed in its mission. It was not the staff at Loma Linda that were applying the pressure, but they were deeply involved in fulfilling the blueprint. Every day they were witnessing how very successful it was. Their lives were happy and their hearts were knit together in fellowship. The students were learning how to become practical medical missionaries in the full sense of the term. Patients were recovering nicely and departing with more than mere physical healing. The pressure was coming from individuals outside of Loma. Two who were especially concerned were A.G. Daniels and W.W. Prescott. Daniels was president of the General Conference. Prescott had been vice president of the General Conference and editor of the Review from 1901 to 1909 and continued to hold important positions after that. So he was also extremely influential. In addition, a number of our college teachers and presidents were opposed to the Loma Linda blueprint. It is highly significant that a few years later at the 1919 Bible Conference, it was Daniels and Prescott who complained that Ellen White's writings were not too trustworthy, while the others present defended her. Specifically, what they wanted was for Loma Linda to obtain partial or full accreditation status with the American Medical Association. Many letters flew back and forth, and the position of Ellen White and John Burden was quite plain. But this did not satisfy the detractors of the blueprint. It was felt that our safety would be found in drawing closer to the way the world did things.
right. Now, see, as early as 1907, right? A.G. Daniels, General Conference president, was pushing for the accreditation of Loma Linda. Now let's read a statement from him. Let's read a statement from A.G. Daniels, the General Conference president at the time. Right, it says, in contemplating a college that will grant medical degrees and diplomas to be presented at state boards and be used by our medical missionaries in their endeavor to qualify for the foreign lands to practice there, I contemplate the establishment of a full-fledged medical college that will be recognized, that will give students a preparation for graduation, that will be recognized by legal bodies such as the American Medical Association. You know it must have such recognition to be worth a nickel. Right? So that was our General Conference president there, A.G. Daniels. Right? All right. All right. So in his mind, the school was to prepare students to be recognized by the world. That's essentially what he said, right? Now, what does Romans 12 and verse 2 say? Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Right? Right. So the reason being given by our leaders for accreditation is so that we can have doctors, right? Now, did God ever tell us to have doctors such as what the American Medical Association recognizes? Doctors practicing allopathic medicine, prescribing drugs, etc., etc.? No, an emphatic no, right? Now, we saw why earlier. This system of healthcare is not after God's order, as it is a type of the false gospel, right? Our General Conference president here was leading into apostasy, right? All right, so let's go back to the screen again. All right, Broken Blueprint, page 260. Right, it says, although most may have had the best of intentions, our leaders decided to bravely push their way towards full AMA approval of Loma Linda. Right? Of Loma Linda. In making this decision, not only did they violate clear and repeated spirit of prophecy counsels not to take that step, but they also violated a basic financial principle. Now, that basic financial principle is don't go into debt. Right. Right. Continues. Because the decision to obtain accreditation had been made, Loma Linda was no longer independent. Add these courses, remove those courses, textbook on these subjects must be used. Put all these into your library, add this equipment, remodel your buildings, increase the number of beds, add more MDs and RNs as medical doctors and registered nurses. On and on it went. Ever more requirements and expenses were demanded. The present writer was told in the 1960s that by that time our hospitals were required to have smoking rooms for the visitors. What other requirements have been made? We know that Loma Linda University today has at least one full-time salaried Roman Catholic priest on its staff. When we start affiliating with the world, there is no stopping point. Right. All right. No, I'm not too sure the Roman Catholic priest thing is still so today. It was so when this book was written, right? But you see where compromise took us? Step by step, it turned Loma Linda into a worldly school. So Loma Linda was accredited in 1910 and remains so to this day, right? Now I'm going to share my screen now and show you, you know, that this is indeed so. Right, right, here we are. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen here. Right, all right, so we all could see this here, right? I'm on Loma Linda University's website here, right? So we see it clearly, right? Accreditation. Loma Linda University is charged with preparing students for the responsibility that comes with a career in healthcare. Accreditations can affirm the strength of our academic programs, as well as our commitment to excellence in education. It says here they are accredited by the WASC, right? Senior College and University Commission, right? That's the name of the accrediting agency, right? So Loma Linda University remains accredited to this day. Now, right? Now, what are some other things that come with being a worldly school? Right? What are some other things that come being a worldly school? Diversity and inclusion, right? Now, we would have seen that in the on the screen there just now, right? Diversity and inclusion, right? So let us look at see if they really are into such things. right? Let us go back to the screen, right? So right there, right? What is this? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Isn't that interesting? Right? Now, do you know of any underrepresented groups that have been agitating recently? They say in their diversity policy that they are catering for underrepresented groups. You know, now in the context of diversity, inclusion, and equity, do you know of any underrepresented groups that have been agitating recently? Well, I know of one, but I'm gonna put something on the screen and hear what you have to say. Oh, somebody said it already. LG LGBTQI plus minus number sign asterisk. All right. Okay. Interesting. Well, let's go to the screen again. Right? Diversity and inclusion, right? Right. So it says here, right? We believe in providing resources to ensure individuals have the opportunity to achieve success. We commit to fair treatment and the elimination of barriers that have inhibited access, professional growth, and advancement by underrepresented groups. Okay, what do we see here? We're still on Loma Linda's website, right? What do we see here? Resources for LGBT plus, right? So they have LGBT cultural competency training, educational resources, right? Creating LGBT plus inclusive forms, right? So apparently this is some course that they have here, right? Um, right? So this one here, National LGBT plus Health Education Center, Fenway Center, right? Says it provides educational programs, resources, and consultation for healthcare organizations. The goal of optimizing quality, cost-effective healthcare for lesbian, gay, and transgender LGBT people, right? So I don't know what you all think about that, but yeah. You see, folks, this is what compromise brings, right? So you compromise, you make a small compromise first, and then it snowballs, right? All right. Now let's go back. Let's go back to Loma Linda's website again. All right. So about Loma Linda University. Okay? Right. The Loma Linda University is a Seventh-day Adventist university offering a unique learning environment through the integration of health, science, and faith. In 1905, a vision of health and hope brought our campus to life in California, sorry. As the campus grew into a force for healthcare and education, the city of Loma Linda grew around it. More than 100 years later, Loma Linda University is a part of a world-class academic medical center. Our pioneering efforts in health and wholeness have touched lives worldwide and positioned us as a leader in health science research. Every day we work in service to our communities and undeserved populations everywhere. Get this now. While a lot has changed since our humble beginnings, our commitment to our values and beliefs remains constant. Today, tomorrow, and always, we commit ourselves to our singular mission to continue the teaching and healing ministry of Jesus Christ. Hmm. You have to say to that. All right. Now, in light of what we just learned about the healing ministry of Jesus Christ and the history of Loma Linda that we just looked at, what do you think of especially the last paragraph that we just read? Well, the only part of that that is true is the part that says, while a lot has changed since our humble beginnings. That's the only part that is true. It changed from following Christ's method of healing to following the world's method of healing. It changed from being the head to being the tail. It changed from being a type of the true gospel to being a type of the false gospel. All this while telling people that they are continuing the teaching and healing ministry of Jesus. What a deception. All right. So I think we're going to leave it here for this afternoon. So next week, when we return, God's willing, we'll be looking at who is the God that healeth thee, part 2. We're going to see, how all of this is connected to, you know, some recent events that happened about 3 or so years ago. Some recent events concerning health that happened, you know, a few years back. Now everybody here knows what I'm talking about, right? So that's gonna be it for now.